Hello, and welcome to Sleepy History Nights. This is a sanctuary of calm, immersive, atmospheric stories from the past designed to help you unwind and drift into rest. Tonight, we'll travel to Edo, Japan in the Tokugawa period, through the eyes of a bridge keeper. You wake before the city fully knows itself. The room is dim, paper screens glowing like held breath. Outside, a cool mist rolls soft and low, laying a pale veil over roofs and alleys. Your sandals whisper on wet wood as you move, and the first sounds are water, a quiet, patient lapping against pilings, the hollow tone of a bell from a boat like a careful punctuation, and the distant scrape of an oar. When you reach your bridge, the wood is still cool under your palms, and the world narrows to the canal and the small motions upon it. A lantern sliding like a slow star, a flatboat drawing a smooth line through grey water, the smell of wet straw and pickled goods rising in clean, simple waves. Boats seem to appear and dissolve in the mist as if guided by memory, not maps. You notice the way larger barges favor the deeper channel and how nimble skiffs thread alleys with practiced ease. A single, gentle question settles in the space between bell and oar. How do so many boats, so many goods and people, move together through this woven city without confusion or delay? It is not a sharp mystery but a soft curiosity, an invitation to listen more closely to the signals the city keeps for itself. But before we begin, if you enjoy calm, atmospheric journeys into the past, I'd love it if you'd like this video and subscribe. It truly helps Sleepy History Nights grow, and it lets me keep bringing you quiet stories like this one. Your support means more than you might realize, and I'm grateful you're here with me at this quiet hour tonight. Thank you, and now, settle in. Let the noise of the day fade, take a slow breath, and allow history to glow softly in the dark. You lean on the railing and breathe the cool morning in. The mist clings to your hair and beaded droplets cool your forehead. The wood beneath your palms is slightly rough, worn smooth only where hands have passed for years. Close enough, you can make out the texture of a boat's hull, the patched seams, the slow moss like a soft fringe. A barge slides beneath the arch with a low, satisfying hush. You feel the thrum travel through the bridge into your boots. This is a moment of small certainties. The clocking of oars, the shared calls that mean yield or thanks, the simple agreement that heavier craft take the wider lanes. Your role is quiet and attentive. You note the water's edge, the subtle change in flow when two currents meet, and you catalogue it with the ease of someone who has lived by these measures. Widen your view. The canals are arranged like a set of deliberate lines. Main arteries that carry grain, timber, and salt move in broad, deep channels, while narrower waterways thread through residential quarters and market lanes. The city organizes itself by water because water is an efficient mover of weight, timber, rice, barrels of soy, and because lanes can be adapted to different scales of trade. You watch as a larger vessel exchanges its load with smaller boats at a bustling quay. Crates are passed from hold to deck with the low creak of rope and pulley, porters timing their steps so nothing jams. There is a flow of schedules you sense more than see. Certain arrivals are expected at particular tides, certain markets open when barges make their rounds. This is the system that keeps the city fed and functioning. Bring your attention close again. Small signs matter. Ropes lie coiled and marked. A red thread tied through a loop might mean a priority delivery, a waxed spot on a crate an agreement to leave it untouched. Pulleys on market stalls groan softly as they lift heavy chests, their metal cool under a palm and smelling faintly of oil. Painted crests on hulls are shorthand, read by boatmen like addresses. You hear the merchant's low voice as he counts cloth in a practiced rhythm. You smell the warm, slightly sweet scent of newly opened rice. These tactile, sensory cues are practical and human. They reduce friction where paper records are scarce and time is precious. Now widen out to the people who make this network live. A boatman calls a single syllable and another replies, permission given, path yielded. Apprentices learn by shadowing elders, learning where the shoals lie, how a quay thins at low tide, when to wait and when to push. Clerks at the waterside ledger mark arrivals in neat strokes, their ink drying like small promises. There are informal schedules passed down in conversation. When the tide runs high enough for the largest barges, when the smaller boats can slip through alley canals to deliver to tea houses and kitchens. Much of the logistics here is social, a mix of tides and timings, marks and manners, rather than an abstract plan. Feel the day in your senses as certainty builds. The mist lifts a touch and the light softens. The metallic clink of a bell becomes clearer, the rasp of a hull against piling reads like a sentence. Your hands know the right tension to take on a line so a boat will nestle instead of jostle. Your ears know the difference between a call that signals arrival and one that asks for space. The system shows itself in ordinary tools. Pulleys that turn a heavy lift into a simple motion, sluice gates that temper currents so small boats need not battle waves, and marked ropes that prevent a dozen hands from tangling. These are small technologies, but in this city they add up to reliability. You find yourself wondering gently about the unseen coordinators of movement. Merchants who plan deliveries by tide, boat captains who remember the quirks of each quay, officials who mark certain lanes for market traffic at specific hours. It feels deliberate because it is deliberated, 1,000 small decisions pooled into predictable patterns. Your watch is one of many small guardians. A timely shout from your bridge, a note to a clerk, a knot tied a shade tighter. These small attentions keep the flow steady. There is no single machine here orchestrating the day, but a woven intelligence made of memory, signal, and habit. As the mist thins and the canal's details sharpen, you stand with the sense that the city is both fragile and resilient, held together by simple things, ropes, signs, pulleys, and people who remember. The question that woke you does not demand a single answer. Rather, it asks that you keep listening, keep learning the city's vocabulary of sound and touch. And as the light shifts, you begin to notice what matters most. The light has edged higher, and you remain on the bridge, watching how the city arranges itself around the water. Boats arrive in small, patient waves. A flat barge, heavy with bundles of straw, glides beneath the arch and leaves a long, soft wake that kisses the quay. A merchant on the bank unwraps bolts of cloth, the fabric parts with a quiet, papery whisper and sends a faint, warm scent of oil and cotton into the cool air. Narrow skiffs thread between pilings with a practiced intimacy, oars ticking like gentle metronomes. From above, bridges cross like layered ribs, some high and elegant to let taller craft pass, others low and intimate, forming sheltered pockets where neighborhood boats nestle. You notice the broader channels reserved for the largest loads, the finer veins that lead to tea houses and shop fronts. The city moves as if following a quiet choreography you are only beginning to name. Bring your attention close. Ropes lie coiled on the quay, their hemp rough against your palm when you test a knot. A rope's salted scent clings to your fingers. A pulley creaks with a patient, almost musical note as men lift a heavy chest, metal cool under touch and smelling faintly of oil. Painted crests on hulls catch the pale light. Each emblem is a simple address, read at a glance by boatmen who have learned that language in seasons of work. The bell at the harbor rings once, low and deliberate, and a loaded vessel yields its path to a lighter one sliding upstream. These small signs are an unspoken grammar of passage. You find yourself wondering, gently, who first shaped this grammar, and how many small rules have been stitched into habit to keep so many people and goods moving smoothly together. Widen your view and let the system appear in motion. There are schedules you sense more than see. Market hours mapped to tide windows, merchants timing arrivals to match the opening of stalls, carts waiting at quays when barges are due. Larger ships off the bay transfer cargo to barges better suited for the city's narrower lanes. At certain points goods are sorted and routed again to neighborhood boats. You watch clerks at waterside ledgers make brief, deliberate brush strokes, each character indicating a next step for a crate or bale. Flags and bells act as soft signals from one quarter to another, and captains memorize the idle quirks of shoals and shallows so they can slip through at the right moment. The infrastructure is less a single plan and more a living coordination of tides, tools, and memory. Return to the intimate details. Your boots catch damp on the dock, and the mist leaves fine beads on your sleeves. A loaded barge nudges the piling with a low, hollow thud. You feel that vibration through the wood into your hands. The smell of fermenting soy drifts from a warehouse, layered over the fresher, sweeter scent of newly opened rice. A boy on a small boat laughs softly as he steadies a crate, the sound bright against the deeper noises of oars and pulleys. These sensations are data in your hands and ears. They tell you if a tide is running true, if a lane is crowded, if a delivery will be smooth. Small senses, repeated, become an expert map. Now watch simple technologies at work. A pulley at a market stall turns a heavy lift into a smooth operation. A sluice gate opens with the soft authority of a breathing thing, and the current rearranges itself to admit a barge. Pilings are aligned to nudge hulls into safe passage, and in narrow stretches thicker pilings protect quays from churning wakes. Bridges sometimes include removable sections or slightly higher arches where necessary, a modest design choice that lets taller cargo pass without delay. None of these devices are grand or complicated, but together they translate the river's moods into reliable pathways. This practical engineering matters because it spares labor, prevents bruised goods, and keeps kitchens and shops supplied without frantic scrambling. Close again and listen. The tact rhythm of a boatman's foot, the soft rasp of a hull sliding past piling, the brisk clap of a hand signaling yield. Men call out single syllables, economical words that mean pass or wait, and others answer with a nod or a bell. You can tell, by subtle shifts in tone and tempo, whether a novice is steering or an old hand. Apprentices learn to read the water by feeling for undercurrents with a pole, by tasting the spray when a channel narrows, by watching how light breaks on a shoal. These are tactile lessons, handed down in low voices and small corrections. You find yourself thinking about the patient way knowledge moves between people here, not as formal instruction but as careful imitation and correction. Widen the frame to consider coordination across distances. Flags raised at the harbor signal tide windows that favor larger vessels. Neighborhood captains remember which quays constrict at low tide and adjust their schedules. Merchants plan deliveries to match market hours when buyers are most ready. There is an informal timetable, an oral calendar of movement, reinforced each day by repeated practice. This social timetable is what keeps food reaching kitchens, timber reaching carpenters, salt reaching pickling houses, simple, trustworthy rhythms that avoid waste and anxiety. Lean in and feel a practical example. A shipment of salt arrives, its coarse smell a dry, mineral note in the air. Men lower barrels with patient, synchronized pulls on a line. The warehouseman tightens a knot and checks a ledger. A ribbon tied to a beam marks the salt for a particular district so porters will not misdeliver. The sluice next to the processing house remains closed until the unloading finishes, preventing a sudden current from upsetting the operation. Each small choice, when to open a gate, where to tie a rope, which signal to raise, keeps the whole operation smooth. The logistics here are built from countless tiny decisions made with knowledge of tides and tools. Return to the senses as the morning steadies. Sun warms the timber and lifts the last of the mist. Reflections sharpen on the water like careful brushstrokes. You breathe in the layered scents of the market and the bay, feel the texture of a rope under your fingers, and hear the city settle into its steady hum. There is comfort in this repetition. Within it lives a practical intelligence that is both informal and dependable. You notice how much of the order comes from people paying attention to one another, from marks on hulls, colored threads through knots, and the patient voice of those who have worked these waterways for years. You find yourself wondering how many small inventions and customs spread from quay to quay, how many ways of tying, timing, and signaling were learned the hard way and then kept so others need not relearn them. The mystery that first caught you is not solved by a single answer, but it softens into appreciation for a network of people, habits, and modest technologies that together make life reliable. And slowly, the pattern starts to show itself. You have been watching the canals unfold their routines all morning, and now you allow your attention to widen toward the subtle engineering that keeps the city moving. The bridge beneath your hands feels like a small command post from which the language of water can be read and, in a quiet way, answered. From this broader perspective, the waterways look like a slow, breathing system. Sluices and weirs punctuate the channels, small wooden gates that manage the rise and fall of water so neighborhoods are neither flooded nor starved. Pilings stand like thoughtful guardians, spaced to nudge hulls gently towards safe lanes, and bridges curve in deliberate arcs where taller cargo must pass. You watch a sluice release with a soft sluicing sound. The current rearranges itself and a heavy barge cooperates with that change, gliding through as if the water has cleared a path by choice. In plain terms, these are simple tools, gates, grooves, raised arches, that let people use the tides rather than fight them, and in so doing they save labor, reduce damage, and make timing predictable. Lean close to the small, honest details. Your palm traces the grain of the railing and feels the faint residue of tar used to preserve the timber. Your fingers come away smelling faintly of smoke and river mud. A pulley at a nearby stall groans softly as a crate is lifted. The rope hums against the wooden wheel, and you can hear each turn as a measured, useful note. The smell of fresh-cut cedar from newly unloaded planks mixes with the sharper sea salt that rides in from the bay. Timbermen test beams by tapping them and listening for a ringing that promises strength. Rice merchants brush a grain to check for dryness. These tactile checks are the everyday diagnostics of the city's infrastructure. Widen out and consider the way bridges themselves are designed to facilitate movement. High-arched bridges allow taller vessels to slip beneath without dismantling their masts or stacks. Low, broad bridges create sheltered backwaters where small boats tie up and goods are handled without being rocked by larger traffic. Some bridges include removable planks or simple lifting sections that can be taken out by a few hands when a special delivery needs the extra clearance. Pilings are driven where currents are strongest, protecting quays from being scoured, and in shallow stretches, stepped embankments and timber aprons support the bank so smaller boats can beach gently. These choices are not abstract. They are the result of hard-won knowledge about how the water behaves at different seasons and tides. Bring your senses back to the immediate action. A barge slides in with a long, sonorous scrape that vibrates through the bridge and into your boots. You taste the faint brine on the air and feel a cool breeze move the mist into your face. Men lift and lower with a choreography of breath and count. A soft chant times their pulls so backs are spared and movements stay in unison. The rope is rough under your touch, fibers softened by salt and repeated handling, and when you press a knot you can feel the neatness of a knot that has been tied 1,000 times. Such hands craft the city's reliability, not by practiced knot. Now focus on sluices and tide windows and how they become a shared calendar. In places where the bay's influence reaches, engineers and boatmen have learned to use the tide. Gates are timed to create calm pools for neighborhood transport at certain hours, while other stretches are opened for larger freight when the water is high. A simple flag at the harbor becomes a public announcement that a tide window is coming, and captains plan their departures around that quiet signal. This synchronization is less about rigid scheduling and more about respect for natural rhythms. It works because many people, across roles, agree to a common tempo. Close to the quay, you hear the soft, practical music of loading, the creak of a sling, the hollow thud when a barrel meets planking, the faint scrape as a crate is slid into place. Fingers leave dusty prints on a ledger when a clerk records a receipt, the brush strokes of ink dry like small covenants. The texture of goods tells stories, a rough burlap sack, the smoothness of lacquered boxes, the straw scent of rice bales, and these textures become signals for how best to handle each load. Your eyes and hands have learned to translate those textures into action. A heavier item needs 2 hands and a careful pulley setup. A fragile crate requires paced, even lifts. Widen the frame again to see how these elements reduce friction across the whole city. Bridges, sluices, pilings, and simple signaling tools like bells and flags are modest, but they create predictable channels for movement. Predictability allows merchants to plan, bakers to receive flour at the hour they need, and carpenters to expect timber in time for morning workshops. The system is therefore as much social as it is structural. Engineers, practical ones who mend pilings, carpenters who adjust bridges, and boatmen who remember shoals, together create the conditions for daily commerce to flow. Return to the intimate for a close example. A timber barge approaches, and you watch its careful negotiation of a narrow bend. The captain uses a long pole to feel the bottom, the wood tapping against riverbed shifting like a soft drum. A helper releases a small, short line at the stern that eases the craft against a piling, and hands steady a beam as it passes. You can feel the vibration of each motion in your chest, hear the low, controlled banter between men, and taste a faint metallic hint from the tool oil they carry. Their small techniques, how they throw a fender, where they place a chock, are local inventions that protect cargo and keys alike. Zoom out to consider the economy of effort. Water moves weight with astonishing efficiency compared to hauling on land. A single barge can carry what would require many pack animals to move over streets. By tuning channels, aligning bridges to pass tall loads, and timing large shipments to favorable tides, the city reduces human exhaustion and material loss. This economy is practical. Fewer bruised goods, shorter labor hours, and more reliable supplies for markets and households. The canal network is not only a route but a labor-saving device woven into the city's life. Close again and notice the small maintenance routines that keep the system alive. Men inspect pilings by feeling for rot, boards are tarred to resist water, pulleys are oiled to keep their small songs steady. A sluice keeper watches the tide through the day, closing and opening a gate when the situation calls for it. The motion is deliberate, almost ceremonial, but entirely practical. You find yourself wondering how many silent checks happen each hour, how many hands keep an eye on a gate, a piling, a bridge joint, so that a single missed rot or a stuck pulley does not become a day's headache. Widen to the network again, and think of how knowledge moves across it. Boatmen trade notes at quays. Carpenters pass on better jointing techniques. A merchant who discovers a shoal posts a quick word and the information ripples outward. There is no central control room, but there is an active, human communication system, oral reports, painted marks on hulls, and simple tokens clipped to ropes, that distributes practical knowledge quickly. In a city that depends on timely deliveries, this living knowledge is the most dependable kind. Finally, feel the satisfaction of being a small, present part of this contrivance. Your watch, a quiet set of eyes and hands on one bridge, contributes to a much larger rhythm. You note the tone of a bell, the feel of a rope, the timing of a sluice. All these modest attentions combine to keep the city afloat and moving with a remarkable grace. You find yourself thinking not of a single great invention but of many small, sensible choices joined together, practical engineering and daily care that turn water into a reliable partner for life in Edo. And as the day deepens, you begin to see how water, wood, and human care have learned to move together in a steady, kind logic. The mechanisms of water and wood have shown their quiet work, and now your attention slides toward the ways people tune themselves to that work with ritual and habit. At a waterside stall, a small group pauses before heavy lifting. Hands come together in a brief bow, a low murmur of words that you recognize as a short blessing. The gesture is almost invisible, swallowed by the sounds of creaking pulleys and passing oars, yet it alters the tenor of the labor. The loaders move afterward with a softer economy, their breaths timed and steady. Nearby, an incense stick smolders in a cracked ceramic dish, the thin smoke curling and carrying the scent of sandalwood into the damp air. These pauses are not merely pious reliefs. They are practical alignment devices, moments that let people confirm plans, steady nerves, and remind one another of shared intent before a heavy chore begins. Zoom out to see how such rituals thread across the quay. Bells toll from a temple roof at appointed hours, and boatmen use these as a public clock. A single, clear peal signals a tide window or market opening, and captains tune their departures to that cadence. Wooden tokens, stamped and clipped to ropes, change hands with a soft clack, each token an efficient little contract saying where a crate belongs and who will carry its cost. Flags are raised on masts to mark priority runs, colored threads knot into ropes to show destination, and small painted crests on hulls announce merchant houses. Together, these signals form a social signaling system, low-tech, immediate, and widely understood. This system matters because it reduces confusion in crowded lanes and lets people coordinate without needing a single written command. Lean close and feel the textures of these customs. The wooden token feels warm and worn between fingers, its edges smoothed by years of exchange. It makes a soft, satisfying sound when dropped into a palm. The incense brings with it a dryness in the nose and a faint bitterness when inhaled. Its smoke seems to tidy the air in the way a window might let a room breathe. A merchant's seal impressed on straw leaves a subtle pattern your eye learns to read, while a ribbon tied around a beam gives you an instant sense of which neighborhood expects that load. All of these little things are sensory shortcuts, simple ways to transmit information by touch, scent, and sight that are faster than pages of writing. Widen again to the social structures that give these rituals weight. Merchant houses carry reputations that are precious and practical. A reliable house will have its marks respected and its shipments prioritized. Neighborhood associations maintain order. They agree, quietly, which lanes will be kept open for household needs and which will be given to larger freight. Guilds and informal crews teach their apprentices to perform the small courtesies that make bottlenecks rare, yielding at a bend, calling out a warning in a certain tone, or tying a particular loop when leaving a boat. These customs build predictability. When everyone accepts the same small rules, the result is a city that runs smoothly because people know what to expect from one another. Bring your senses back to a single, telling scene. A long flatboat arrives with barrels of pickled plums. The warehouseman touches the merchant's crest and murmurs a name before signing the receipt. His inked brush leaves a definitive mark, and the barrels are rolled with a collective chant that times the lifts. The chant is almost musical, a soft rhythm that coordinates breath and strength. Inhale, lift, steady, set. Each lift is a beat, and the chorus of many such beats across the quay forms a human metronome, preventing jerks and strains that might bruise goods or injure bodies. You can taste the sharpness of the plums in the air, hear the straw whisper as a barrel is unbound, and feel the gentle vibration of a rope sliding through a hand. The ritual and the technique are inseparable. One calms and aligns, the other turns that calm into efficient motion. Zoom out to the way these practices prevent small problems from growing. A missed ribbon or an untagged crate can cause a confusion that ripples into delay, barges wait, markets pause, households fret. But when a token is clipped, a ribbon tied, a bell rung, the potential for error shrinks. People remember favors and debts. A captain who has been helped in a tight turn will reciprocate later, and such exchanges of kindness lubricate the city's daily mechanics. You notice how often small gestures, returning a borrowed rope, passing along a tip about a shoal, or offering an extra hand, stop small frictions from turning into collective headaches. Social capital here functions like maintenance oil. It keeps gears sliding quietly one against another. Turn your attention to signaling methods in action. A captain raises a flag from his mast in a particular pattern. Downstream, another man who knows the code slows his boat to make room. A clerk makes a quick stroke in a ledger, the ink still wet, and someone on a different key understands that a shipment will be rerouted. Oral reports travel quickly. A boatman who notes a shifting sandbar will shout that word at a landing, and the news runs along the water like a current. There is no single control booth. Instead, an active, human communication network spreads necessary adjustments with gentle speed. It is an intelligence distributed through eyes, hands, and memory. Lean close one more time to the quiet formalities that reassure and order. A brief bow before an exchange says more than politeness. It signals shared responsibility and a readiness to honor the agreement. A lifted hand, a soft call, the exchange of a token, these tiny events are the city's pulse points. They let people coordinate in real time without escalation. You notice how much of logistics here rests on trust performed daily, promises kept in ink, in tidy knots, and in steady work. The rituals transform promises into actions. Widen to consider how these customs scale up in special moments. During a festival, the canals are cleared with polite requests and mutual accommodations. Procession routes are coordinated so that neither trade nor celebration need suffer. At harvest time, barges carrying grain arrive in scheduled waves, each expected and welcomed with practices that speed unloading. These larger rhythms are possible because the small, everyday rituals have already woven a network of predictability and care. The city's efficiency is therefore social as well as mechanical. Customs and courtesies are integral parts of the logistical system. Come back to your bridge and feel how these practices deepen your sense of purpose. Your nods, your calls, the small recorded notes you leave for a clerk, each is a stitch in the city's pattern. You find yourself wondering how many of these rituals began as private solutions to particular problems and then spread because they worked. Something feels deliberate because it has been tried, tested, and taught. The fragile balance of trade and traffic holds not simply because of gates and pulleys but because people have learned ways to be predictable and kind to one another. Listen to the soft clatter of wooden tokens, the murmur of prayers, the faint smoke of incense, and feel how social systems and material systems interlock to make movement gentle and reliable. The answer to your quiet question reveals itself in a surprising way. The city's logistics are part engineering, part etiquette, and entirely human. And as the bell rings again, you begin to see how people's small rituals keep the city's motion kind and sure. The bell's slow peal fades and you stay where you are, the bridge a small, patient observatory. The rituals you watched have settled into the key's rhythm, and now your day narrows into the close, quiet work that keeps that rhythm true. You begin with the ordinary checks that, in time, become a kind of calm liturgy. A rope is examined the way one might read a friend's expression. A careful squint at the fibers, a test pull to feel for weakness, the scent of salt clinging to the weave. Your fingers find a frayed strand and you tuck it back, reweave a loop with hands that have memorized the motion. The wood under your palms gives a faint, familiar creak when you press. The sound is a small report of age and endurance. Nearby, an oar taps the water in a steady beat, a polite signal that a narrow boat is threading a close channel. These actions are unremarkable on paper, but here they are the day's quiet arteries. Lean close to the senses and let them guide you. Midday light shivers on the canal like hammered silver. The reflection of an upper bridge flickers across the water and breaks into slanted characters of shadow. You smell hot oil from a pulley just serviced, the sweet, almost fruity edge of newly harvested rice, and the mineral tang of river water. A child calls out somewhere down the bank, a bright, quick note, and you notice how that sound makes boatmen glance up with easy smiles. Your hands remember which knots will hold best when rain is expected. Your ears know the subtle difference between a hull scraping gently and one that needs immediate steading. These are the small instruments of navigation that do not appear in ledgers but matter just as much. Widen your view for a moment to see the connective purpose of these motions. The bridge you tend is a node in a living map. You pass short messages with a nod, you signal the clerk across the quay with a wipe of your palm on a ledger to indicate arrival, you steady a line so two men can shift a crate without colliding. Each minor intervention prevents a cascade, an upset crate that would jam a narrow lane, a delayed delivery that would make a shopkeeper miss the market bell. The canal is a chain of such moments. Your small attentions are links that bear the town's daily weight. In this way, logistics is less a plan on paper and more an embodied practice shared by many hands. Return to the intimate. A barge glides under your arch and your body answers with cordial, practiced motions. You step forward and offer a raised hand, a signal practiced since apprenticeship. A single syllable carries across the water and the pilot eases his course. The oak under your palm is warm, smoothed by the thousands of small touches of past bridgekeepers. Your breath comes in with the river's faint chill. When the barge slides by, you feel the wake like a small, friendly push against the bridge's belly. The men on board shift in unison, their timing a quiet choreography. That shared timing is a language you speak without thinking. Zoom out to how crews and clerks compose the larger day. Boatmen exchange brief courtesies that double as updates. A mention of a shoal, a nod about a late load, an almost throwaway tip on where a quay is slick with algae. Clerks add a brushstroke to a log and pass the news along. Porters line up in small rows like human conveyors, their movements quietly rehearsed. These micro-communications are the network's nervous system, rapid, local, and tuned to the senses. They are not formal dispatches so much as living habit, and they travel faster than any written instruction because they are felt and heard in the moment. Lean in and feel the texture of a day's small repairs. A loose plank is wedged back into place. Tar is warmed and brushed along a seam. A pulley is greased with the same patience as a cook tending a simmer. The tools are simple, almost modest, a wedge, a mallet, an oiled rag, but they save hours of trouble. You smell the resin when you warm the tar and taste the faint sweetness of smoke from the brazier used to heat it. Each repair is an investment in tomorrow's calm. Small labor today makes the flow tomorrow easier. Widen your gaze to the social scaffolding that supports these practical moves. Apprentices watch and mimic. Older hands correct with a soft touch rather than a sharp word. A merchant from across the canal recognizes your signal and returns it with a polite bow, a tiny exchange that affirms both the rule and the relation behind it. Trust here is practiced in gestures, lending a spare line, holding a lane a moment longer, noting a problem in the margin of a ledger. Such acts circulate as a kind of social currency, valuable because they prevent friction and because they are repayable in ways that keep relationships whole. Return once more to the sensory. Midday heat warms the rope on which you lean. Dust lifts in a thin, golden cloud where feet have scuffed the quay. The faint cry of gulls from the bay threads through the deeper city sounds. A woman in a small boat leans over to steady a ribbon on a crate. You help by steadying her oar with the flat of your hand, and her grateful smile feels like a small, necessary blessing. These tiny exchanges are the texture of belonging. They are how people measure one another's reliability and kindness in the absence of formal systems. Zoom back out and reflect on the unseen consequences of such tiny actions. A tightened knot here can prevent a crate from splitting, which keeps a baker's oven fed at dawn. A timely note to a clerk can spare a delivery from being sent down the wrong canal, saving a cart and a man's afternoon. The logistics of the city are therefore a mosaic of modest choices. Each one seems insignificant alone, and together they add up to a remarkably steady flow. The bridge keeper's role, you realize, is not heroic but essential. You are an enabler of many small mercies. Close with a quiet, human moment. You exchange a brief greeting with a passing boatman, and he offers you a sliver of dried fish, an impromptu, practical thanks. You taste the salt and warmth, and the exchange feels like a seal on a day's work. You tuck a note into the ledger about a shallow patch to be watched, straighten your back, and look along the canal where reflections shimmer and life continues in its patient, woven motion. You find yourself wondering how often such small acts of care go unnoticed by the wider world, and how little the city would be without them. And as the afternoon wanes, you notice how a dozen small acts hold the city's day together. The afternoon you have kept moves on, and that sense of dozens of small acts binding the day together stays with you as light softens. Your hands are still warm from checking a mooring line when something about the canal's rhythm draws your attention. A boat approaches that is slightly out of step with the usual passage. Its lantern swings with a hesitant rhythm, its oars tap the water lighter than expected, and the crest on its hull you do not recognize suggests it is from a house that does not usually trade this lane. The late haze blurs edges and makes the splash of each oar sound sharper, like a sudden punctuation. You notice, too, that the single bell the pilot might have used to announce his approach is silent. These small differences sit in the air like a question and invite the steady curiosity you have brought to this post for years. Lean close and let your senses sort the scene. The rope at your feet has a faint give when you test it. The fibers are damp where the spray has risen, and the knot you tied this morning holds with a neat, reliable bite. The air smells of tar and a faint sweetness from a nearby tea stall, and you can taste the saltiness that the bay sends on the breeze. The pilot's voice, when he calls, is thin and almost apologetic. Your palms remember the right pressure to give on a line to steady a nervous hull. Your ears know the difference between a boatman who is simply tired and one who has lost his bearings. There is no hurry, only the careful attention of a hand that has learned to prevent ripple effects. Widen your view to the canal's social weave. A mist bell or a soft lantern can matter because the quay behind you is a corridor of scheduled work. A merchant expects his crates to be unloaded during a particular tide window, porters have their cadence for carrying loads, and an apprentice will miss a learning moment if a shipment is delayed. When one small item steps out of rhythm, the gentle gears of many days can begin to grind. The system here is not brittle because many people watch and respond. What looks like a single disruption becomes an opportunity for neighbors to fold in and mend the flow before it frays. Bring your attention back close as you decide how to act. You lift your hand and call the practiced syllable that asks for space, your voice low but clear as it crosses the water. The pilot answers with a softer sound and eases his oars. You steady a line with a practiced knot, fingers quick and sure. The pulley on the key hums when you give it a little oil from the rag tucked at your belt. The metal's faint scent of oil fills the brief, quiet interval. Your adjustments are small and precise. A tug here, a slack taken up there, a short word to a young crewman who needs to reposition a fender. Each motion is a correction that keeps tiny problems from growing. Widen again to how neighbors respond. A woman on the next quay leans out with a lantern and offers its light without a word. An older boatman, who has watched this lane for decades, steps forward to steer the wayward craft through a shallower bend. An apprentice who had been watching from the steps runs to fetch an extra line. These are not commands but gestures of shared care, the social tools that the canal depends on. You notice how such readiness is built into the city. People know that a small, courteous action now will likely be returned in kind when they need it. The logistics here are not simply mechanical. They are woven with habit and reciprocal attentiveness. Close to the scene again, the late light makes reflections on the water tremble like loose characters on a page. You feel the wood of the bridge warm where the sun lingers and cool where shade has already settled. The boat's pilot thanks the older man with a bowed head. You hear the soft scrape of oars and the resettling of cargo as a crate is shifted to balance weight. The smell of steamed rice rises briefly when a package is opened for inspection, a reminder of the human needs riding on these movements. In those sounds and smells you sense how each small correction safeguards livelihoods and routines. Widen to the idea of redundancy and distributed care. The canal functions because responsibility is shared among many small roles. Bridge keepers like you, boat captains, clerks, porters, and householders all hold pieces of the system's memory. When one part falters, another part often steps in. A missed signal is rarely a catastrophe because the pattern of mutual aid acts as a natural backup. This human redundancy is not a formal plan but a living practice. People learn to notice, to respond, and to keep a gentle order in motion. Return to a close, reflective moment as the sun dips lower. You smooth a knot with practiced fingers and show the apprentice the tuck that keeps a line from kinking. He repeats it, sheepish and pleased. The young man's face, lit by a sliver of gold, shows concentration and relief. A merchant whose load was nearly delayed nods at you in quiet gratitude, his hands rough and steady. You can taste a faint tang of tea, hear the distant murmur of an evening market beginning to prepare, and feel the satisfying tension of a rope properly set. These are small satisfactions, but they matter. They are the emotional glue that keeps the network from fraying. Widen out once more to think about the ways small choices amplify. A tightened knot here can prevent a cracked crate there. A timely lantern can prevent a scrape that would require a repair crew and slow a lane for hours. The sum of calm, attentive acts makes the city's life predictable and gentle. Logistics, in the end, is not simply about movement. It is about the human willingness to notice and to act with modest generosity. You find yourself wondering how many such moments go unseen, how often small, unobtrusive care keeps markets stocked and kitchens warm. Close with a quiet sense of belonging. The canal breathes a little more steadily as the boat slips into its lane and the quay resumes its measured work. The late haze blurs the world into softness. The occasional splash is less sharp now and becomes part of the evening's hush. You tie one final knot and step back, feeling that the day's small disturbances were answered by a chorus of ordinary kindnesses. In that chorus you see how the water's flow depends on people who are willing to be attentive, patient, and present. And as the light cools, you feel how each small decision helps the city keep its gentle motion. As evening settles, you keep the bridge lit with a small lantern and let the canal's hush carry the day's questions into night. The chime of a distant temple and the soft lap of water against pilings hold a steady rhythm, and you find your thoughts turning to the long story beneath those sounds. When you step back and look for causes, 3 calm possibilities come to mind. One is quiet engineering and adaptation, hands shaping channels, embankments raised where floods once licked, sluices added to manage tides. You can imagine men and women over generations testing simple designs, stepped banks, angled pilings, removable bridge planks, until the water and the city learn to converse. In that picture, the waterways are a crafted instrument, modest innovations accumulated into a reliable instrument for moving weight and people. Bring your senses close and trace the evidence. The lantern warms your palm. Tar on the railing leaves a faint, smoky scent on your fingertips. The wood under your boot gives a soft, familiar creak. Each patched piling and furred joint feels like a page in a manual written in grain and knot. You can practically hear the echo of past hammers in the steady creak of the key, and in those small, tactile things you recognize the work of adaptive hands. Another angle is that of policy and spatial design. Edo, as the seat of power, may have had planning forces that nudged waterways into particular shapes, broader channels where taxes were collected easily, bridges placed to frame neighborhoods for security or prestige, quays aligned to service official institutions. If so, the canals are at once infrastructure and a means of governance, routes chosen to make the city legible and manageable in the eyes of rulers. Close to that idea, you notice the quiet markers of oversight, the evenness of a main thoroughfare, the tidy alignment of certain quays, and the placid authority of customs houses where clerks' brushstrokes are as regular as the tide. The smell of ink and a soft, bureaucratic rhythm of counting suggest an administrative hand. You imagine officials walking these banks in formal shoes, noting which lanes to keep clear, making decisions that ripple down into everyday life. A third, equally persuasive thread is economic practice. Merchants, guilds, and everyday trade shaping the map from below. Routes that saved time or spared labor would be favored, widened, and ritualized. Simple signals, painted crests, colored threads, tokens, would spread because they worked. Over seasons, small efficiencies accumulate into durable patterns, and what began as improvised shortcuts becomes custom. Feel this economy in the air, the faint sweetness of rice drifting from a just-opened crate, the rough kiss of rope on a palm, the brisk murmur of a market preparing for tomorrow. These sensory details are the currency of trade. When a merchant finds a better way to move goods, he teaches it to others, and the city changes quietly, lesson by lesson. There is also a softer, elemental reading. The land and water themselves shape the possibilities. Tides, seasonal floods, and the underlying marshy plain dictated where channels could be most easily dug and maintained. People learned to listen to the estuary, timing departures to a generous tide window, abandoning lanes where shoals gathered, and building embankments where sediment settled. In that view, the canals are a negotiated landscape, part human intention, part patient response to nature's moods. You can feel this negotiation when a boatman, pole in hand, tests the depth with a gentle tap. The sound is a low, controlled question, and the water answers with a tone that tells him where to steer. The cold on your cheek is the same chill that once forced earlier makers to rethink a key's placement. Nature did not relent. It required cleverness and compromise. These theories are not mutually exclusive. Perhaps the most plausible story is one of braided causes. Modest engineering providing the scaffolding, governance setting broad rules where needed, trade refining local practices, and nature offering constraints and cues. Over decades and centuries, each influence braided with the others until a resilient, flexible system emerged. The canals look inevitable now, but their inevitability is the product of many small choices layered into habit. Lean close to your role in that braid. Your nightly checks, the knots you tie, the small signals you pass to captains and clerks are a continuation of the same work that once shaped the water's edge. You oil a pulley with an old rag, and that tiny gesture saves a day's worth of trouble for someone tomorrow. You steady a lantern and make possible a safe passage through a narrow bend. Those are practical acts, but they are also cultural continuity, small attentions that keep knowledge alive and shared. Listen to how human practices function like safety nets. Where a sluice might fail in a storm, neighbors with extra fenders and spare lines will come to help. Where a political decision rearranged a main channel, guilds and merchants would have adapted the patterns, trading favors and inventing signals so that trade remained predictable. The system's resilience is social as much as structural. You find yourself wondering about the many small choices that became standards. Which knot was first favored because it held in storm? Which ribbon was first tied to indicate priority? Which bridge section was first made removable to admit a taller mast? How many solutions began as local improvisations and then spread because they worked? How many generous pauses, polite bows, and shared lanterns prevented a day's misfortune and were later remembered as custom? Close again as night deepens and the canal glows with lantern reflections. The water is a slow mirror, blotched with gold and soft blue. The distant toll of a bell measures time without urgency. A breeze brings the layered sense of the city, smoke, salt, the faint herbal note from a tea house, and for a moment the past and present feel continuous, stitched by the same small attentions. Finally, accept the pleasure of not resolving the mystery completely. There is a gentle wonder in leaving the question open. The idea that a city's logistics grew from conversation, between water and wood, between rulers and merchants, between neighbor and neighbor. The most nourishing answer is not a single cause but a patient mixing of many causes, each shaping the city in its modest way. You breathe in the cool night and set your lantern where its light will catch the ledger. You are part of a long, unbroken practice of attention and care, and that thought settles into you like a quiet tide. And as the night deepens, you begin to weigh the quiet causes that shape this living map. You remain on the bridge as the lanterns tremble, carrying forward the questions you began to weigh in the cool night air. The canal's surface holds the soft reflection of a dozen small lights, and you let the thought of origins unfurl a little further. From this vantage, several plausible strands come into sharper view, braided now into a single, believable story. One strand is the slow accretion of local invention, small technical fixes and clever habits that spread because they work. Another is the intentional shaping of space by officials and planners, choices made to make the city governable and defensible. A third is the persistent influence of nature, tides and shoals posing constraints and offering opportunities, and the quiet human conversation with those conditions over generations. These are not competing claims to be armed against one another, but complementary lenses that, when held together, illuminate how the canals became both useful and enduring. Lean closer and read the evidence like a map of touch and smell. A tarred seam along a piling tells of routine maintenance. The faint taste of brine on the air hints at regular sea breezes that once dictated when heavy freight could safely enter the inner lanes. Your fingers trace an old nail head sunk low and battered from repeated landings. Its rounded face is a record of hands and rope. The creak beneath your boots, the warm residue of lantern flame on nearby boards, the soft oily smell of a pulley recently tended, these are the tactile sentences of a long conversation between people and place. Widen out to notice how modest engineering and social practice reinforced each other. A sluice or a removable bridge section is useful only if people know and agree when to use it. Pilings that guide hulls are effective because captains expect them and steer accordingly. A flagged signal matters because clerks and crew have learned its meaning. In plain language, physical features create possibilities, and social customs turn those possibilities into reliable routines. This socio-technical weaving is what makes a system resilient. Where a gate or a pulley might otherwise sit unused or misapplied, a shared habit makes it matter. Bring the idea down into daily life. Imagine a timber delivery that must arrive at dawn for a carpenter's morning work. The captain times his run to a tide window, but he also trusts that a bridge keeper will hold a lane, that porters will be at a quay at a certain hour, and that a clerk will note his arrival in a ledger so the merchant can be billed. Each of those expectations is supported by small protocols: a raised flag, a clipped token, a brief bow. These social mechanisms are low-tech but high-function. They coordinate actions across distances without the need for a central controller. The system's efficiency comes from many small agreements kept routinely. Close again and listen to the practical instruments of that coordination. A wooden token drops into a palm with a soft click and becomes a promise. A bell's clear tone cuts through mist like a short command. The whisper of a rope through a hand signals an arriving load. You can almost taste the sweet grain of rice as a crate is unbound, smell the tar on fresh planks, feel the slight give of a mooring line under your fingers. These sensory notes are not incidental. They are the feedback loops the city uses. People don't just read a timetable, they read texture and tone and scent, and those readings tell them when to act. Widen the frame to consider political shaping. Where a ruler or official seeks predictable tax revenue or wants to keep key routes secure, canals and quays can be designed with that end in mind. Broader channels for official barges, neat quays near administrative offices, and watchful points where customs may be checked. That kind of top-down influence leaves subtle traces. Main arteries kept clearer, formal inspection points with small buildings, and the placement of bridges to control flows. Yet even where officials place constraints, the everyday life of trade pushes back and adjusts, creating a negotiation between governance and practice. Bring that negotiation into touch. You can see it in the evenness of a main quay and the slightly improvised character of a back canal. The smell of ink and the crisp sound of a clerk's brush on a ledger feel different near an official landing than in a neighborhood lane where children play. Both are necessary. Legible spaces help administration and defense, while porous, flexible lanes let markets keep up with demand. The city's durability comes from holding both kinds of spaces in balance. Close to the water again, imagine the natural forces at work. Tides and seasonal floods do not submit to human plans. They insist upon adaptation. Where a certain bend gathers silt each summer, neighborhoods learn to time their runs or to create small channels that wash out sediment. Where a low tide stranded larger hulls, removable planks or staged offloading solve the problem. In each instance, the solution is practical and adaptive rather than grandiose. The feeling is of a long, patient conversation with the estuary. Humans propose, the water answers, and practices evolve accordingly. Widen and notice how all these forces create redundancy and flexibility. A sluice that helps during high tide may be backed up by neighbors who keep extra fenders. Official scheduling may be softened by guild customs that allow priority for household supplies. Such overlapping responsibilities are a kind of safety net, social redundancy built into the system. Rather than a brittle reliance on a single solution, the city gains strength from multiple modest solutions that can substitute for one another in times of strain. Lean inward now and let the personal matter. Your role on the bridge is part of that braided resilience. By tending a rope, oiling a pulley, or nudging a boat with a polite call, you enact the same adaptive intelligence that built the canals in the first place. Your hands maintain practical knowledge, your voice passes signals that keep promises, and your watchfulness fills gaps left by maps and plans. In a way, every careful motion you make is a small act of civic engineering. Close with a sense of appreciative uncertainty. The most satisfying explanation for how the waterways became what there is not a single origin story, but a layered one, modest engineering choices refined by political shaping, economic practice, and a long negotiation with tides. The wonder lies in the many small decisions and daily acts that accumulated into a living map, and in how present hands, yours included, continue to write that map each day. You set your lantern on the railing, feeling its warm glow on your palm, and listen as the canal returns to its gentle murmurs. You find yourself wondering which small decisions made centuries ago still echo in the ropes and creaks beneath your feet, and which practices you keep now will be the traces others read by lantern light years from this night. And slowly, the pattern starts to feel like a living conversation between water, wood, and people.